Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hadar Harris, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law here at the Law School. We're so happy to see everybody here today for what is an extraordinary panel and discussion regarding the future of Sudan after the recent vote and after the last, how do we even frame it, 20, 30, 40 years of grave difficulties in the region. Before I hand over the panel to Matt Simpson, who's going to be moderating the event today, I just want to say a few words of real serious thanks to the Human Rights Brief, to Andrew Mackey and to Evan Wilson, the co-editors-in-chief, who have put today's event together. They took on themselves an extraordinary undertaking in a very short period of time to pull together today's panel, and I want to thank them. Also, I'd like to thank the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting for their co-sponsorship of today's event. It's an important discussion to be had. We're very glad that all of you are here today to partake in it and to participate. And at this point, I would like to hand it over to Matt Simpson, who is going to be moderating the panel and discussion today. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Hadar. And I'd also like to second Hadar's thanks to the Human Rights Brief for putting together a fantastic event, bringing out a good crowd. It looks like a great lunch. It's disappeared, so that's always a good sign. And of course, Hadar and the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law, and the Pulitzer Center as well, who have done a phenomenal job with Beck and her team on this truly phenomenal book as well. My name is Matt Simpson. I am the Darfur Project Director for the Public International Law and Policy Group, or PILPG. I'm also one of two accredited legal advisors to the Darfuri delegation, currently, I think we can still say, currently negotiating a peace agreement in Doha. I've just come back from 7 months in Doha, and I'll likely be back there in the near future. So it's my pleasure to moderate this event. I get to insert the legal disclaimer that you always hear. Anything I say is my personal view, not the view of PILPG, and certainly not of my clients, GEM and LJM. And for full disclosure, we also represent the SPLM, another team of PILPGs, in all their post-2011 referendum negotiations. And so, personal attribution, nothing beyond that. I'll very quickly introduce the panelists, and if it's all right with them, I'm just going to give the very initial byline. I think you all have their full bios, which are incredibly well established and impressive in your little packets and available out on the desk. So Beck Hamilton first is the author of Fighting for Darfur, a fantastic book that is getting a great deal of attention and certainly well-deserved. She's reported from Sudan for the Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, The New Republic, and the Christian Science Monitor. Beck is certainly well known as one of the people who has been on the ground the most and done a tremendous job of reporting from the field and characterizing what's going on there. Next, we have Juan Mendez, who's a visiting professor here at WCL. He's also the UN Special Rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment or punishment. And then finally, at the end, we have Suleiman Boldo, who is the Africa Director at the International Center for Transitional Justice. A very diverse, well-established panel, and I think what we'll do is we'll begin. I'm going to present each of the speakers with one question initially to kickstart things. They'll each give their responses. If anybody else wants to chime in, please feel free, and then we'll open it up to more of a free-flowing discussion, because there's many different issues to talk about in the context of this new Sudan, the new North, and the new South, and the problems and the opportunities facing those two new countries. So if I can begin with Beck, who's just returned from the field, who saw the referendum firsthand, and if you can characterize a little bit of your sense on how the referendum unfolded, where you see things going, and what's it actually like in Sudan right now?
Sure. So, I would start by saying that 3 months ago I was in the majority of people probably who thought that it would be impossible for this referendum to happen on time, let alone as peacefully and successfully as it did happen. And so, first, it's you don't often get a good news story out of Sudan, and so it's worth taking a moment to just really congratulate both the northern and southern governments, the international community, and most of all, the people of southern Sudan themselves for pulling this off. It was an amazing month to be in the South. And, if I had to characterize what I saw last month, in almost all areas, there's an important exception to this, which is Abyei, but in almost all areas, there was just this feeling of absolute euphoria. People's keenness to vote, I mean, you could see it on the first day of voting. You had people queuing up from 3 o'clock in the morning. Not because they were going to miss out. There was a week of voting, but everybody wanted to be there first. For me, one of the most striking images that I think will stay with me forever was I was at a polling station in Unity State. There's not a lot of infrastructure in the South, so the polling station was a bombed-out church. I saw a little kid pushing a wheelbarrow up to the polling station. It was sort of unclear what was going on, and I got up a bit closer. And inside the wheelbarrow was this woman who was writhing in pain, just in agony. And she had, her legs were sort of wasted up and curled up underneath her. And when I went up, there was some family that came around and explained that obviously she's very, very sick. They didn't know what was wrong with her. They were very keen to try to find some medical treatment, but she was absolutely refusing to let them do anything until she had first gone to cast her vote. And they had no other way of getting her to the polling station than putting her in a wheelbarrow and taking her there to cast her vote. And talking to other journalists who were covering the referendum, these kinds of stories were not at all unusual across the South during this week. The question is, what were people voting for? Now, we have the results. We know over 98% of people voted for independence. So you say the obvious answer is they voted for the independence of Southern Sudan, freedom from northern governments that have conducted this war over so many decades, and the death of 2 million Southerners have resulted. But speaking to Southerners over the course of the past 6 months, and in particular in rural areas, what I have heard consistently is when there is independence, there will be school for my children. If we are sick, there will be a hospital for us to go to. There will be roads, there will be electricity, and we'll have clean water. Like that. And so there are associated with this vote for independence and freedom absolutely enormous expectations from the population. And so now, as the euphoria of the referendum will start to wear off, inevitably over time, there are really big governance challenges facing this new nation. And the new government of Southern Sudan, we have to remember, just 6 years ago was a rebel group. So they're being asked to make a huge transformation as well. And complicating the matter further is that you don't have to scratch the surface or think back very far to realize that this moment of unity and euphoria of the South coming together in this past month, it's a unique moment that is not typical of the history of Southern Sudan. Southern Sudan, like the rest of Sudan, is a very, very diverse population. During the North-South War, the SPLM was not the only rebel group. There were other rebel groups. And as much as this new government has an enormous amount of goodwill from the people at this moment, there are still significant pockets across the South who don't see this as a government for the people of South Sudan. They see it as the rebel group who happened to win what was an internal southern war that was happening simultaneously with the North-South war. And so for the government to get beyond that sense of mistrust that many of the population still have, they're going to be needing to meet citizen expectations and meet them really quite quickly. And you don't, just a sort of brief summary of the statistics gives you an insight into how hard that's going to be. 40 miles of paved roads throughout the region, 85% of the population are illiterate. Compounding the problems on the education side, I've been visiting a bunch of schools recently, and that 15% that can read or write, for the most part, have been educated in Arabic. During the war, the North was imposing Arabic as the only official language of Sudan. most of the southern population, they speak a language in addition to their traditional language. They're speaking Arabic, they're not speaking English. And so you go to schools these days in southern Sudan and you have teachers that are a very rare resource because they're among the educated few trying to teach a curriculum in English because for perfectly understandable reasons, the government of southern Sudan has said, well, if we're going to be an independent new nation, we now get to decide what is the official language. The official language is English. So in these schools that are already struggling, you're having teachers that are simultaneously trying to teach in English at the same time as they're learning. So that's a snapshot of what's going on in the South, a moment of euphoria, huge expectations, big governance challenges ahead, and lots of tensions that are just simmering there under the surface. The exception to the general euphoria is Abyei, and I don't know if we want to go into that now or perhaps later, but the people of Abyei were also promised a referendum last month. Their referendum, however, didn't happen. And so people in Abyei town itself, who are mostly southern, are absolutely terrified that this country will split in half formally on July 9 and that they will be stuck in the north. And this is leading them to sort of panic mode, talking about making a unilateral declaration that Abyei belongs to the south. For the moment, they're being dissuaded from going ahead and doing that. But if they make that declaration, I think there's a huge risk that the Missouria, who are a northern nomadic population who have to get down to the river that lies below Abyei town in the dry season, if they're able to survive. So for their cattle to survive through the dry season, there's this amazing river that runs below Abyei town. And traditionally, they have gone there during the dry season and returned when the rains come again. I think they're going to panic that if the Nokdinka in Abyei town declare Abyei for the south, that those grazing rights are going to be cut off. So you have the potential, a huge potential for conflict there. And if it escalates, will there be anything that can really stop it? And then the question of what about the north? I haven't been in the north for 6 months now, but during the southern referendum, I was getting panicky phone calls from friends and from civil society leaders in the north with a really interesting mix of emotions. The view that we tend to hear about the north is the government view, and it focuses on what the referendum means for the government, and key among that is it means a loss of 80% of Sudan's oil. But for many of the people in the north, who don't actually get to see the benefits of oil anyway, the loss of the south means something quite different. For many of them, it means a loss of their connection to the rest of Africa. If you look at a map of Sudan, you see the north connection to the Arab world, the south connection to the African world. And they have a more complex understanding of what it means to be Sudanese than the one that the regime has been trying to impose. So there's a sadness for the loss of the south and a panic that the international community is now going to be spending the entirety of its financial and diplomatic resources on seeing this new southern nation do the process of nation building, which is a huge challenge. They're not going to have any resources left in terms of leverage or in terms of finances to deal with the very, very many outstanding issues within the north itself. Darfur, obviously, being a huge one, but other areas as well. People in the east, people in the Blue Nile, people in the Nuba Mountains, who all have legitimate grievances against the ruling regime. So for them, it's a mixture of some happiness that Southerners have got the freedom that they've been fighting for, but also a huge amount of nervousness about what lies ahead.
Fantastic. I think at that point, if we can skip over Juan for just a second, because that segues perfectly into Suleiman, what I was hoping you would talk a little bit about. And that's namely the Khartoum regime's response to the referendum. How have you seen them react to the vote? Beck mentioned that many of us thought it was impossible for the vote even to happen when it did. Perhaps a little bit of what the Khartoum regime did or did not did to help that happen, prevented it from happening, or didn't stop it from happening, and then the international community's role in all of this, because we hear a lot about U.S. policy. The P5 have played a strong role as well, and how are they influencing the Khartoum regime's response, if at all?
Well, Khartoum agreed to self-determination for South Sudan during the peace negotiations that ended in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005, mainly with the idea that an eventual separation of South Sudan, which they can only expect to happen, given that the South Sudanese are getting the right to self-determination, would assist the government in Khartoum to then go about realizing its project. The Khartoum government is dominated by a radical Islamist party. Its project is to establish a modern Islamic state governed by Sharia law, and to therefore prevent interferences that would prevent this project from realization. I guess by conceding self-determination, they were also expecting that during the interim period of 6 years, there will be ways of making unity attractive, not by investing in South Sudan or assisting the population in South Sudan, but by associating political elites of the South into the spoils of power at the national level. It's a small party that dominates the national economy. Lots of corruption, lots of basically conflict of interest with officials owning private companies, taking government contracts, and believing this is all allowed under the principles of Islam, finding ways of justifying that. And they thought that the SPLM, the Sudan People Liberation Movement, the rebel movement in South Sudan, would be tempted by this model, whereby the ruling elites appropriate the economy, and therefore it becomes a matter of self-interest rather than the interest of the South as such. And I guess that's why the government in Khartoum, until late in 2010, was really not prepared to the scenario whereby the South would go to the vote and would separate, because they were expecting that they will trade with their counterparts in the government of the South this way. The regime now has lost its ideological credibility because of the corruption factor. It's all about survival in power. And therefore this renders them very vulnerable to international pressures. And that is exactly what the international community did, putting a lot of pressures on Khartoum to make sure that the referendum goes, according to schedule and plan as fixed in the peace agreement, peacefully, and that Khartoum recognizes the outcome of that referendum. And Khartoum has behaved very well, compared to its record of being a spoiler, of being, a thug, and basically getting what it needs by force. Why? Because in complying with the demands of the international community, Khartoum expects rewards in the form of lifting of international sanctions against it, and particularly from the US, which are the most hurting, debt forgiveness, lifting of the Khartoum government from the list of states sponsor of international terrorism, and the freeze of the mandate and of the investigation of the International Criminal Court in Sudan that led to the indictment of President Bashir. They want the indictment of President Bashir to be referred by a Security Council decision. And now they believe this is a time for rewarding them for good behavior. The pressure card that Khartoum has against the international community and the southern government is that they have the capability of making southern Sudan ungovernable. During the war, the military intelligence in Khartoum ran 30 militias in South Sudan. Most of them joined the Southern Army after the peace agreement, but they were not really integrated in the Southern Army. They preserved their ethnic structure, their chain of command, and Khartoum could just pay limitless amounts of cash to these, warlords and bring them over, or not even bringing them over, but, instigating and stoking localized fighting and violence within South Sudan and making it an impossible task for the SPLM to, deliver on state building that is expected of it. That is, a sort of, the pressure card that Khartoum has against the international community and against the government of Sudan. And they are reminding, publicly, they are reminding the international community they could still do it. You see, we see how they used militias to great effect in Darfur. They have done so in South Sudan, and they're capable of going back to the same, practices. So it's now a situation of what would happen if Khartoum doesn't get the satisfaction it expects, or the rewards that it expects, because of its so-called, between brackets, good behavior. And I don't think that this is going to be a story with a happy ending. Thanks.
It's unfortunate, but I agree. There's a few things I'd like to come back to, but first, you turning to Juan now. Suleiman just mentioned the NCP and Bashir in particular, his desire for reward for good behavior, and one of those rewards that's currently being discussed is the notion of invoking Article 16 of the Rome Statute to defer prosecution of Bashir at the International Criminal Court. Can you touch on a little bit of the history of what the decision that was made to prosecute Bashir, perhaps, the first sitting head of state that's been indicted by the ICC, and what impact, if any, do you think the referendum will have on the decision to defer or not to defer?
Well, thanks. First, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this. But I also hope to have some sympathy from all of you for having to share a panel with two major experts on Sudan when my claim to any familiarity with Sudan is so much more limited than theirs. But I still think this is a fascinating issue, and I appreciate the opportunity. And also, the more directed question is helpful also. But as you know, the Security Council referred the case of Darfur to the International Criminal Court in 2005 at the suggestion of several UN bodies, but particularly after a major investigation conducted by the Commission of Inquiry chaired by Professor Antonio Cassese of Italy, which is, as far as I know, the most detailed and the more profound investigation of what really happened in Darfur that has ever been done. And the Security Council did refer the case, and then for months or years didn't say a word, even though from the start the Khartoum regime publicly announced that it would not accept the referral, even though it's a referral under Chapter 7 of the Charter, so it's binding on Sudan. Nevertheless, the Office of the Prosecutor was able to conduct investigations, not necessarily relying on the Commission of Inquiry's investigations, but doing their own, without the assistance of the government of Sudan and without being able to conduct their inquiries in Darfur itself. But in the diaspora and in Chad, they were able to collect enough information to indict first a Janjaweed leader and a senior official, and then later President Bashir himself. As you know, charges of genocide against Bashir were initially not accepted, but then on appeal they were. So right now, he and the other two officials are under arrest warrants. and there's also 3 leaders of the rebel movements that have appeared voluntarily in The Hague, so they're not under arrest, but they are under investigation and possible prosecution. So I think for a situation in which the country is so reluctant to help in any serious way, the results of the ICC investigation are very positive. I don't think Bashir will ever, or will not anytime soon, be brought to justice in The Hague, but the effect of the prosecution has been very good in terms of deterrence, in terms of putting some bargaining chips on the table that the Khartoum regime has to reckon with, whether they want to or not. But unfortunately, I agree with Luis Moreno Ocampo that the rest of the international community has been less than forceful in insisting that decisions by the ICC, even preliminary decisions like these, have to be supported, have to be complied with, have to be engaged seriously. That doesn't mean necessarily that you send a troop of Marines to arrest Bashir, but there's been precious little in the way of contributing or using the argument of his indictment or his arrest warrant to continue to isolate them. If anything, African governments have, by denying him an invitation or saying that if he does come, he's going to have to be arrested pursuant to their obligations under their own statute. But the northern and western world has been very acquiescent on Bashir's rebelliousness with regards to the ICC. And as Suleiman has said, it has to do with trying to get other things out of Bashir, like accepting the referendum in the south. But as far as I'm concerned, these bargains are not the best bargains that can be obtained. In fact, by downplaying the seriousness of charges like genocide, we're only encouraging Bashir to play more and more games, and those games are going to be played with the South as well. I'm very glad to hear Beck and Suleiman, saying what they think is the game that Khartoum is playing, because it is undoubtedly a game. I mean, it is good that the referendum happened and that Khartoum let it happen, but you have to wonder, what is it that they're expecting? And I'm afraid that they expect that Southern Sudan, being such a poor country, and that the international community, being so prone to go into the next crisis somewhere else, that after the referendum, Southern Sudan will kind of fall like a rotten fruit in the hands of Khartoum anyway, because of geopolitical reasons or lack of development. And there, we have to insist that the international community's responsibilities for Southern Sudan start now. They didn't end with the referendum. The responsibilities to help in the development of Southern Sudan are really very important now. And I'm not prejudging that it's not going to happen. That there's not going to be attention to helping Southern Sudan become a serious nation. But I'm afraid, because of past histories in conflicts like this, that may be one of the possibilities, that we just move on to some other place. I think in an important way that has already happened with Darfur, because in order to get the referendum, in order to get intelligence assistance in the war on terror, in order to not to expel all the relief organizations but only some of them, we've been letting Bashir call the shots in Darfur, to the point where we have 3 million people who are fully dependent on international assistance. What they get in international assistance is really sorrowful. It's really sad to see, and yet we don't do enough to come to a settlement of the question in Darfur in ways that are fair to the Darfurians, and that really make the government of Sudan responsible for having committed genocide.
Fantastic. I think if we can stick with the notion of justice and accountability right now in the ICC, Beck, I'll turn to you, and then perhaps Suleiman, you can comment as well. Juan just mentioned that the arrest warrant for Bashir on genocide perhaps acted to some extent as a deterrence. What is your sense on the impact of the ICC's engagement on Darfur on the ground for the people of Darfur? Has the government showed a degree of restraint or concern or even awareness for the ICC indictment? And equally so, have the rebels? Have you seen a change among them in terms of a sensitivity to, or at least awareness of, the ICC and the possibility of further prosecution? And one correctly mentioned the 3 Darfurians that have already been summoned to the court.
Yeah, certainly in speaking to Darfuris in Darfur, but also Darfuris in Chad and in the diaspora, for Darfuris as a people, I would say that the ICC has been overwhelmingly positive, not because I can point to a specific aspect of deterrence, not because anyone thinks that Bashir is going to end up in The Hague anytime soon, but for something that's a little harder to pin down. It's something that falls, I guess, in a psychological realm. It is the sense that there is some body, some international body out there who says this was done to your people and this is wrong, and we are absolutely clear about that. And I think in the sort of expert commentary, and in particular in the West, there is a huge amount of cynicism about the ICC, a lot of critique of it, much of which I agree with in many aspects, but on this fact of being the one body in the international system that has been absolutely clear and unwavering, that speaks to Darfuris in a way that they see reflects their reality, the ICC has had an enormously positive impact. And as the debates start to go forward, and I think they will, about whether the UN Security Council will suspend the arrest warrant, and it's important to note they can't cancel the arrest warrant. Under the Rome Statute, it can only be suspended, and they have to renew that suspension every year in order to keep it going. But as that discussion happens, I think it's important to remember this is not a situation where you have the people that are actually the victims of the conflict saying, we think it would be helpful if you would suspend it. Maybe if you would suspend it, then Bashir would be serious about talking peace with us, which are some of the things that you are hearing from some groups in northern Uganda. That is not the situation that you have in Darfur. You have Darfuris overwhelmingly saying, no, we need the justice piece first. How can we do peace with this person that we see as responsible for killing so many of our people? You're asking us to do a peace agreement with him? No. And so I think that's going to be the voice that needs to be amplified and that gets too often lost in these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, it's again, when you talk to Darfuris in Darfur and in refugee camps in Eastern Chad, clearly there is a very high level of expectation that the ICC, International Criminal Court, would resolve all the issues for justice. Darfuris don't see their neighbors who were recruited into the militias as the most responsible for the violations inflicted upon them, but they see the government, and rightly so, as the one which really was responsible for sending these militias against the villages and for destroying their property, attacking their families, killing their loved ones, and so on. So when the indictment fell down, there was a degree of satisfaction and realization that justice is being done, and this is only the beginning. However, by its very nature and statute, the ICC can only deal with a limited number of those most responsible for the most egregious crimes, of course. And the Rome Statute system is one which encourages complementarity, which encourages national proceedings. to address other levels of responsibility in war crimes, crimes against humanity. With Khartoum, we have a regime which is very arrogant in its very nature and structure. For President Bashir, it's like a personal insult that is the subject of an international indictment. And the regime reacts based on this realization. Their response to the ICC is one in which they are trying to undermine the court and the Rome Statute system. The court by denial of, for example, of cooperation, of course, as the state. Khartoum is not cooperating with the investigations of Darfur. By this insistence of traveling to show that Bashir cannot be stopped from going all over the world, so he's traveling left and right just to score points with Ocampo. But more seriously, at the political level, Khartoum has led a very aggressive campaign to encourage the African Union to join it in pressing for deferral of the arrest warrant by a decision of the resolution of the Security Council as provided for under Article 16. And many African states, and there were several resolutions by the summit, the heads of states and governments, Assembly of the African Union, the highest decision-making body, calling precisely for that. It is interesting that at the level of the political decision-making bodies of the African Union, there is support for Bashir case. At the level of the African Union as a professional secretariat, there is a counter-push from within the regional body. And that's why the Commission, the Permanent Secretariat, proposed in Mbeki panel precisely, an independent panel from the African Union to propose ways of reconciling peace, justice, and reconciliation, all at one as desirable integrated approach to the issue of justice in Darfur. And that panel has come with very strong condemnation of Khartoum practices, and established, that the record was correct about the crimes for which the government is responsible. It did not deny the authority of the International Criminal Court in Darfur, and on the contrary, it required Khartoum to cooperate with it as a legal body and not through political means, and it called for the reform of the legal system in Sudan and the justice system, the judiciary system, so that it's capable of conducting war crime and crimes against humanity trials, prosecutions, and trials in Sudan in a way that is in line with international standards and requirements. And ultimately, it called for a sort of a hybrid system, not a hybrid court alone. There's a hybrid court, but a hybrid system in all prosecutions and the judicial system within Sudan, so that the judiciary and the legal system in Sudan is reformed sufficiently to conduct investigations. This is the African Union which is saying it. And Khartoum is finding it difficult to say this is judicial imperialism, as they are saying in the case of the ICC. It's really in a corner because of this situation. One final word about this. Khartoum, of course, has set complementarity mechanism. It has a specialized court for crimes committed in Darfur, a special prosecutor, but these are then done as technical requirements to say we are qualified to conduct these investigations and these trials. In a way, they are trying to use their own statute system to really undermine the system, and of course, this mechanism don't have any credibility. Contrary to the effort in Uganda, which appears to be a bit more serious in trying to qualify Uganda for a complementarity challenge to the indictments in the case of northern Uganda. Thanks.
Yeah, I think if the Security Council were to act on Article 16 of the Rome Statute, it would be a very serious mistake for the future of the International Criminal Court, because precisely the framers of the Rome Statute didn't want to have a court that was, kind of in the pocket of a political organ that could be turned on and off whenever, interpretations of the political necessities would require. That undermines the independence of a court and its impartiality. But so far, I think there's very little chance that that will happen. I mean, as you know, more than a year ago, 2 years ago, this was attempted, and the ICC, the Security Council didn't even contemplate it. I know that there's a formal request from the African Union to that effect, but remember that they need to have a majority of votes, and vetoes don't count on this, because you have to have an affirmative vote to stop the ICC from acting. So even if, say, China wanted to protect Khartoum, it couldn't do it with a no vote. They would have to gather the 9 out of 15 votes that would be necessary. And I think, quite frankly, Khartoum isn't given any reason to do this. Now, that doesn't give me a whole level of comfort, because Khartoum doesn't give the international community any reason to do anything seriously, and yet we're constantly, kind of letting Khartoum off the hook. But on the question of the ICC, I think it will be very unlikely. I also think that the Mbeki panel has really kind of put the matter into perspective, because if there is a good reason for the ICC to step back, is because justice is being done in the domestic jurisdiction under the complementarity principle. And I agree with Suleiman that in Uganda at least they're attempting that, and more seriously. But what I've seen of the special panels for Darfur, and this was some years ago, so I hope I'm not wrong, but I haven't heard anything.
Is the case, definitely.
It's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to be better.
I mean, yeah. Well, they were bad enough then, and if they haven't gotten any better, I mean, we actually, with the help of UN personnel on the ground, looked carefully at each of the cases that they purported to have investigated, and it was such a sham example that it would have been almost laughable if it wasn't, because the events are so tragic.
Yeah, if just add one of my experiences with the ICC, and we were contacted by Bahar Abu Garda, the first of the Darfurian 3 rebels, to surrender to the International Court, and we negotiated the terms of his surrender, and then helped him secure Karim Khan as his defense counsel. And one of the things that was a strong motivator for Bahar was his assertion of innocence, but also the fact that he truly felt he could not get a fair trial in Sudan. The special courts in particular were things that he drew attention to, recognizing that in many cases a Darfurian, and this had just happened to several GEM soldiers about a month prior to his surrender, Darfurians would go into the regular court system, be acquitted, they would walk out the front door, the security police would arrest them, walk them in through the back door into a special court, they would be found guilty at that moment, given 1 week to appeal, and in some cases they were executed 1 week later. This was something that was very, very real for the Darfurians. It was very much on their mind. And there was a strong realization among many of the internationals that we dealt with as we negotiated the surrender that indeed this was the only opportunity that he had to get a fair trial. Now in the end, there was not even a trial because there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. But the idea that there's domestic mechanisms in Sudan that are functioning and able to take care of these issues is indeed laughable, and it's something that's come up a great deal in the Darfur peace negotiations in Doha the last several months. What justice mechanisms are appropriate and necessary, and are any domestic mechanisms at all sufficient? Turning to a bit of a different topic here, because we could certainly talk about the ICC and the justice issues in Sudan for quite a while. But in light of all the recent developments in Egypt and the rest of the Arab world, we've seen considerable uprising. We've seen governments that have been in place for many years become quite vulnerable, in the case of Egypt, even topple. And this is a question for all the panelists, what is the likelihood of what somebody referred to as an Egypt-style uprising, a popular uprising in Sudan? Do you anticipate that's a reality in the next 6 months? Is it a legitimate threat to the NCP, and are they even worried about it?
Let's say of the current revolt in Cairo that it's a Sudanese-style uprising. back in 1964, October of 1964, trade union movement in Sudan, student movement, and the opposition organized a political strike and a civil disobedience campaign that peacefully toppled a sitting military dictatorship back in 1964. And then there was an interim period in which the trade union movement was actually in charge of the transitional government for 1 year until elections were prepared. Elections took place, parties were in power, democratically elected government, and the military staged another coup d'etat 4 years later, 1969. The Sudanese trade union movement and civil society groups were again at work in 1985, in April of 1985, and repeated the same scenario. That was again a successful, peaceful, popular uprising that toppled a military regime for the second time in the country's history. Unions were in power for a year, and then the parties came and said, thank you, all monkeys go back to their trees, go back to your unions, go back to your universities, we take charge, and they messed up things, which allowed Bashir to stage a coup d'etat, and he's in power today. Of course, from day 1 of 1989, 30th of June, there was a total war against those in society that are capable of organizing civil uprisings. Trade unions, students, youth organizations, women organizations, the media, professional associations, doctors, lawyers, you name it, were massively arrested, dismissed from public service by the thousands, preemptively, not because they thought of anything against this new regime, but to take the idea of organizing civil uprisings out of the culture of the Sudanese. Systematic torture was practiced for more than 5 years in these parallel detention places, the so-called ghost houses, and the repression was so massive that the capability of organizing anything of this nature has been totally, basically crushed. Opposition parties were subjected to similar, repression, to the point that today there is no capability of, mobilizing mass organizations in the way the Sudanese did in 1964 and 1985, and therefore the small attempt that occurred on June 30, in January 30th of this year, after Tunisia. And before Egypt, just after Egypt started, to try and repeat the same thing by student movement mostly, was immediately crushed from the beginning, just again to prevent anything from taking root. However, I see that things may happen because of economic pressures that are mounting, due mainly to the separation of the South, and the fact that Khartoum has been spending the oil wealth on security and security alone, not in creating jobs, prospects for youth, and so on. So there is a total dissatisfied youth in urban areas who are not, part of any functioning national economy, who see all these examples of corruption, and that could be the triggering factor. There's also a lot of blame for the sitting regime for having lost South Sudan. They are held responsible for having pushed Southerners to break away. The public opinion, as you heard Beck, really feels a sense of loss. They don't blame the South for choosing independence, but they blame the government for not having made enough effort to make unity a credible option for the South. And therefore, I see a convergence of popular unrest due to economic and political factors, more spontaneously than organized, but a more serious possibility of armed insurgencies in Darfur, in South Blue Nile, and in South Kordofan, coming together to challenge the regime in Khartoum. It's really, the risk of destabilization is not in South Sudan. It's more in what remains of the North after the separation of the South than in the South. The South, there will be a lot of assistance from the international community to help the Southern government build a credible state and to stay on track in relation to governance and to tolerance and these things. They cannot afford to make any lapses as they did during the transitional period. In the North, there will be real challenges of disintegration due to these other factors. Yes.
I mean, I would only add, so I spent quite a bit of time with the students that had organized the January 30 protests, but they have been organizing these protests for at least a year now. They had enormous expectations of the international community that they would have had a free and fair democratic election last year, and they felt completely devastated and betrayed by the international community for the fact that it wasn't a democratic election and the international community just let that happen without really calling Bashir out on it. So I think that they're not just something that happened on January 30, having looked at Egypt. They're a longer term force than that. As Suleiman said, at the moment they don't have a lot of support. It's just a few students. But I think if they begin to recognize that their potentially powerful constituency is not others in Khartoum who are tied to the opposition parties or who have quite a lot of economic benefits from the current system, but the marginalized that are all around the periphery of the North Sudan. And if those people were ever to come together, that would be an incredibly powerful force.
I don't have much to say. Perhaps a comment on the attitude of the international community, because I think on Egypt particularly, the Obama administration has been a little better than the Western countries, but not by much. And we've been always behind, a day or two behind, and a dollar short on support for real democratic change. And there's also, excuse me, there's been more of a preoccupation with stability than with real change, and stability understood in ways that that seem even short-sighted, because you can't rely on stability with dictatorships. They're just not stable by definition. And I'm afraid that for all the things that have been said already, the attitude towards Khartoum is also going to be very careful not to disturb, even though two administrations already recognize that this is a genocidal regime. It's not only just a dictatorship. It's much worse than that, and yet we negotiate with it as if it were kind of a source of stability in the region, when in fact it's far from it. So I'm afraid that when those students that Beck is talking about gather a little strength, I'm sorry to say, but I think the support from the democratic governments of the North and the South and the West is going to be very lukewarm. And maybe it's time to start thinking about the lessons of Egypt, and for when, obviously it's going to have to be the Sudanese who decide when is the right moment to push for democratic reform. But when the time comes, I hope that we're not going to be more worried about not disturbing the little humanitarian assistance that is given there, or the limited cooperation and intelligence against in the war on terror that is given as well, and that we will have a serious concern for the spread of democracy.
Sticking with the issue of U.S. engagement, I want to give Suleiman and Beck a chance to address this as well. And if you can mention or touch on, if you care to, last week President Obama nominated General Gratian, the now former U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan, to be the ambassador to Kenya. And if you could touch on if you think that will have any impact, or what impact it will have on Sudanese U.S. policy with regard to Sudan going forward.
I traveled with General Gratian to Darfur in 2009, and what was abundantly clear on the ground was that he had completely lost the trust of the Darfurian people. So the first meeting that we had with a group of displaced Darfuris, there was a guy there who had a luggage tag over one eye. And I was there doing research for the book. There other journalists there, and we were worried that perhaps his eye had been gouged and there was no medical care. It was sort of unclear what was going on. But he stood up and he looked at us and he said to Gratian, "I would like to give my greetings to Condoleezza Rice, to George Bush, and to the Republican Party of the United States. You, Mr. Gratian, I cannot look at with both my eyes because you make a death sentence to me." And that kind of summed up. Then this was Gratian's, welcome to Darfur. Now, in his defense, I think that Gratian looked at what were the carrots and sticks that were available to him when he came into the position. The US had already maximized all the sticks that it had. It didn't have a credible threat in hand of the use of force. Really, it only had carrots to offer. And so he decided to work with the carrots that he had, which is the promise of normalization. And when he looked at Sudan,
With both sides.
yeah, with both sides, the judgment that he made was that if the referendum didn't happen, basically that was the number one priority. Everything else was secondary to the referendum happening, and that the referendum was not going to happen unless you had Bashir. And so everything else got sold out in advance of that project. And I think it's been terrible for Darfuris, but the referendum's happened. And I wonder whether, maybe this is exactly the right time to move Gratian off the file. He doesn't have the support of Darfuris. It's not going to be helpful to keep him on the Darfur file. The Southern referendum happened, and now he's being moved on. I don't want anyone to think, and I hope this is not the thought process within the Obama administration, that Kenya is going to be an easy case in the next 2 years as it looms to its 2012 election and everything that's going on there.
The focus on the referendum and the mass migration and the U.S. policy drew attention away from Darfur. So at this time, there is a real escalation in Darfur. The government is on the move, campaigning there, trying to militarily annihilate, the justice and equality movement, which is the most serious military threat on the rebel side in Darfur, and pockets of liberation and justice movement, of other factions that have presence on the ground. This is not receiving much attention. So Khartoum is getting away with it, as they did with the elections. The problem is that, the attention of the international community, not only of the U.S., keeps swinging, full attention to Darfur, and therefore detailed follow-up on the comprehensive peace agreement, stabilizing it, making sure that there is, regular progress towards the agendas of the referendum, and not last-minute, rush as it happened, or, full attention to the south of Darfur gets forgotten as happening now. But it's also the case that it's a situation of not north-south or, Khartoum, Darfur. This is a country where the real structural problem is between a dominant hegemonic center at all levels, political, economic, and with control of the use of force and repression, against all the peripheries, against the south, the west in Darfur, southern Blue Nile, which are the parts of northern Sudan with populations that are more ethnically, culturally, identified with the south, eastern Sudan with the Bija, even the peripheries of the north along the Nile, along, closer to the border with Egypt. All these regions are, marginalized. And today, the strongest opposition party in the north is actually the SPLM in the Nuba Mountains and southern Blue Nile. And it's a militarized party because they went to war with the SPLM in South Sudan. There was a decision last week from the SPLM to organically, separate the northern branch in the Nuba Mountains and southern, Kordofan in the national opposition from the southern Sudan People Liberation Movement. So we do have a militarized opposition group in northern Sudan, which is the most organized, and Khartoum has to deal with this seriously. I don't think they are doing it. They are not getting the message. They are not, really getting it, just like Mubarak, or that's another similarity between what's happening in Egypt and Tunisia, and the threat is real, and I expect a lot of destabilization because of that.
We've got to. I'm sorry.
You-
I was going to open the floor to questions, but I didn't mean to cut you off. If you had.
No, just on Gratian, I can understand differences of emphasis with a bilateral and a multilateral relation with a country that is so complex. But I still can't be convinced that you needed to say very publicly things like we are de-emphasizing, we are decoupling Darfur. I mean, it doesn't seem to me like it's good policy to say, well, if we get the referendum, everything else can go down the drain because it doesn't matter. By acting that way, I mean, we made it possible for the kind of fighting that is going on in Darfur again, as Suleiman just said. In fact, the only faction that actually signed the Darfur peace agreement in 2006 is again fighting. So there's no peace agreement at all, if there ever was one, with respect to Darfur. And the international community, including Gratian, acts as if, well, we kind of, muddled through there and we settled it. I think this, first, it's even if it stays this way, it's so unfair, so utterly, cruel to the people of Darfur that it's unacceptable. But you also have to reckon with the fact that things can get and probably will get a lot worse. And we don't have any plan to reacting when they do get worse. And, I hope he does better in Kenya, but up until the last minute, Gratian appears at a joint news conference with Foreign Minister Ali Kardi and praised government cooperation with UN peacekeepers UNAMID in Darfur and defended the Sudanese Humanitarian Aid Commission's restrictions on aid agencies. The government of Sudan has taken great steps to lift restrictions on UNAMID, he said. We've seen great improvement of access for UNAMID and for the international NGOs. That's Gratian speaking literally a couple of weeks ago. So it's not so much the problem of emphasis and trying to get one problem solved at a time, but it is the kind of signals that you send when you de-emphasize and decouple, and these are his words, not mine.
I'd like to open the floor to questions, if anybody in the audience has a question.
Yes, on the outside chance that Omar Bashir is arrested and extradited to The Hague to stand trial, what effect do you think that will have on North-South relations? And as a corollary to that question, from the perspective of peace in the Sudan, is the prosecution of Bashir even desirable at this point?
We'd like to field that one.
You can answer on impact.
First, I don't expect that it would be likely that we'll go anywhere that there is a genuine risk of him being arrested. He selects, countries he visits very carefully, and after having secured guarantees beforehand from ones, for example, he traveled in July of 2010 to Chad, a member of the Rome Statute and of the ICC. He asked for guarantees from the president of that country that he will not be arrested, but he also asked for guarantees from the president of Chad that the French military presence in Chad would not interfere with his plane. Idriss Deby, Chadian president, flew to Paris and got those guarantees from President Sarkozy and asked Bashir for a favor of taking the heads of the political Chadian opposition out of the border area of Darfur, which Bashir did. He flew them to Qatar, where they are now in exile, and he traveled to N'Djamena without being interfered with. That was more significant than his trip to Kenya, actually, which happened weeks later, because Chad is a member state, but it has also domesticated the Rome Statute in its own national law. So there's a lot of effort being done to counter the ICC arrest warrant against Bashir, and the whole diplomacy in Sudan is geared towards that. Whether there is a belief now in the international community that we need Bashir to resolve the North-South issue. There are all these issues, the border demarcation, the sharing of the oil revenue, Abyei. This has all to be settled between now and July. And therefore, end of January at the the African Union summit in Addis Ababa, President Sarkozy, who addressed the meeting, then told the African Union, and I have it from informed sources, such as Africa Confidential, just to be, it's a public domain, that he promised the African Union leaders, if the African Union re-push the issue of deferral of the arrest warrant against Bashir, France will support this in the Security Council, and that it will lead persuading the P5 to back up the request of the African Union for deferral. African Union has done just that, and we are all waiting to see if France will lead the US and Britain into this push. Two other members of the five are known, China and Russia, they are going to support it. But there is this, and we have it from very reliable source. You can go to Africa Confidential for the details. So there is a lot of politicization of the whole issue, even at the level of the Permanent Five, due to political interest in keeping Khartoum engaged with regard to the soft landing of the South Sudan, but also because of calculations of France, the oil interest in southern Sudan. They have a joint venture, Total and the Qatari oil company, for a concession within South Sudan, which they want to do jointly. U.S. with the issue of international cooperation on terrorism and so on. And it's not just a matter of accountability, unfortunately, for all these powers. Khartoum is playing the game of nations very well, It's really doing all that it takes to, protect Bashir from the indictment.
Just a small piece to add into that. One of the things that the ICC was criticized for was that it made public its application for arrest warrant of Bashir. And subsequently, people said if you'd been serious, this was seen by some people as grandstanding, if you'd been serious about actually getting Bashir arrested into The Hague, the thing would have been to apply for that arrest warrant and get it issued under seal, so that he would have traveled to one of these countries that might have actually arrested him. And part of the discussion around that at the ICC, and I'm not revealing any privileged information here, but was a belief that that could be a very irresponsible move to make with a head of state, to have him leave the country one day, going to another country for some diplomatic meeting, and suddenly never come back, to be suddenly in The Hague, extradited there, and potential chaos in the country because suddenly there's no president and nobody's prepared for it. And so part of the ICC decision was to signal very clearly to the international community, to the Sudanese people, that this was on the table so that you could build the political will and put the systems in place to eventually manage, I guess, a transition if he is taken eventually to The Hague. What you've seen, unfortunately, is the international community not getting behind that process at all. And for me, there was a moment of huge missed opportunity with the election last year. But there was just not the will of the international community to actually support a democratic election.
It looks like this attitude of we need Bashir, overshadows everything else. He can get away with a fraudulent election, he can get away with genocide, he can get away with refusing to cooperate with the ICC. And it seems to me like this was the opportunity to have a really impartial assessment of why he is not the solution. He's the problem. He is the spoiler. I hope someday the international community will think that we need Bashir the way we needed Karadzic and Mladic, and we needed Milosevic, and we needed Mubarak. At some point we have to decide, there are people who are the problem, not the solution, and they can't be the road to the solution either. Unfortunately, if there was one occasion in which, an impartial, really credible assessment was made, was this indictment, and yet we still, see the international community more ready to undermine its own institutions than to uphold the rule of law.
Well, I hate to cut the discussion off, but I see that it's almost 1:20. We're going to get kicked out of the room, I think, pretty soon for a class. So if you can join me in thanking the panelists, it was a fantastic discussion.